Do you feel confident with the standards of safety in our dance community? What can we do to protect, improve, and make it safer for everyone? Well, let's find out. Hello everyone, and welcome back to ZoukNerds. In today's episode, we are diving into a crucial and sensitive topic: behavioral issues within the dance community. We'll be addressing how we, as a community, deal with these challenges, what role each of us plays in fostering a safe environment, and how can we learn from past situations to make better decisions for the future. Stay with us as we navigate these complex situations in this episode. So, let's go! Trigger warning. This episode discusses sensitive topics including allegations of misconduct, abuse, and community safety. Listener discretion is advised. Hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of ZoukNerds. My name is Alisson Sandi, and I'm here once again with our beautiful co-host, Prada. Hello, Gui!
Hi, Alisson. Hello, everybody. Welcome back.
Thank you for being here once again, Gui. And today we have another very, very special co-host with us. And you might already know her from previous seasons of ZoukNerds when she was here with us every week. And it's Laura Riva. Hello, Laura. Welcome back.
Hi, I'm happy to be back.
And thank you for being here once again. We're very excited to have you back. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about behavioral issues in the community. Well, it's not something new to the community, unfortunately. It's something that has happened over and over again. But today we want to address how we as a community are dealing with this and what role each of us play in how to keep safe and how to look in the past and in the future to make better decisions, right? And one thing that I want to talk about, a recent situation that just happened, if you are in the Brazilian Zouk community, you might know what we're talking about, is the fact that this happened and it didn't really happen within another person in the community per se, right? So like other cases and other situations that has happened in the past, it was very much that, but this one wasn't. And we are curious to understand, like, how did that case affect the community in such a strong way, not just because it is something terrible, but also because it wasn't inside of the community. So we've seen a lot of discussions about that. And that's the first question that I have for you, Laura. How do we navigate things that happen inside of the community and outside of the community, and how it affects what we do here as dancers?
Well, I mean, in this specific case, what happened was very severe. It was a criminal indictment. There's a trial planned for it. So there's a degree of severity with this specific case that I think for the vast majority of people supersedes that difference between whether it was in or out of the community, right? Because we're always talking about like essentially a scale of severity. So there's, is it a risk to the dance community or not a risk to the dance community? It happened in or out of the community. Was it to a dancer or someone outside of the scene? And all of those things are affected by severity, right? Something happening in the scene that poses a risk to teen dancers that's lower may still be really significant. And something that's the same level outside of the community may not be significant. But in this case, it was so deeply disturbing to a lot of people that it really did not matter that this happened to people outside of the community.
I think one of the reasons why we wanted you to come back, Laura, is because I think and we think that you have maybe one of the most influential voices in our community and has a moderation to your opinions. Everything you express considers the complexity of the situation. I think you can see through multiple lenses and understand maybe what's going on the heads of the dancers, the heads of the teachers, and of the attendees, and of the organizers, right? And one of the things that got my attention a lot on this case was the immediate response to boycott the event, to cancel the event, to don't go there, because there was this association that income that is made from the event is going to go directly to the defense. And we don't want that. We don't want him to have any of these resources. I don't want to pay for his defense, basically. And you presented like a very reasonable, sensible point of view in regards to event planning. So we don't jump into these conclusions that because we are paying tickets, the money of the ticket is going to go to this thing. And you presented like a very nice point of view about it all. So my question to you about this is, how, as an event organizer who hired the artist, how do you go about this whole situation? How did you go about this whole situation? Or do you have processes in place for when something like this happens? And do you communicate with other organizers as well? I know you do, because many times actually reach out to you for advice. But how do you see that part of the organizer in all of this?
So there's kind of like two parts to that, right? So the first is what happened in this specific instance, right? And what was somewhat unique in this particular case is that the main organizer was the person indicted, right? Which, to my knowledge, we have not had as dramatically in the scene before. I can only think of one other case where there was an organizer specifically that had something happen around their integrity, right? And so like this knee-jerk reaction of, oh, we have to boycott, we have to not go there. In that sense, I understand where it came from, right? This situation was a little bit unique in that someone unrelated to the main organizer stepped into the ruins of the events that was in 2 weeks to kind of put something back together. And that was done very intentionally and things like that, which has essentially reincarnated it as something completely different, even though it's at the same hotel, the same weekend, and the same passes apply, right? So from an organizer standpoint, coming into this mess, that's kind of what needs to happen if you have an organizer specifically who is involved in something of this severity, right? Who says people are boycotting the event created by the organizer because they are boycotting the organizer, right? That's a little different than if you're an organizer trying to manage the behavior of people that are hired or attending your event, right? Or like, this person did something in the past, should I hire them for my event? And that becomes an exercise for the individual organizer in understanding where their values are for event organization. There's some organizers who don't share the same values as me, right? They may think that certain behaviors are okay or not okay, that I'm not okay with or I'm okay with. And that reflects in the type of event they hold, the people that they invite to the event, the atmosphere that they create. And when they're doing that type of analysis, it's kind of a value first analysis. But I think the other part that goes into it is, okay, as an organizer, if I am going to give this person the benefit of the doubt, how do I ensure that I am doing this in a responsible way, right? Because you can believe that someone is okay, but you also have a duty that if there is a whisper or a hint or an allegation or something like that, to make sure that if they are involved in what you're doing, that you have safeguards in place that makes you confident it won't happen there, and that is not solely reliant on the person's decisions, right? Because they might make bad decisions. People make bad decisions all the time. So if I know someone has had an issue behind closed doors in private lessons, okay, am I going to mandate that they can't do private lessons at my events? It's happening alone with a student. They require a chaperone approved by me, that type of thing, right? And that can help mitigate risk. And as an organizer, you have to decide, is this too much work or not enough work? But it's irresponsible at the end of the day to not put safeguards in place if there is a question, right? So a little bit of a meandering answer there, but this case itself is a little different than the average organizer role in adjudicating bad behavior, because in this case, the issue is the organizer. It's not a party at the event.
That's true. I really appreciated that you didn't assume by default that the new person that stepped in knew or was aware of everything that happened, or approved or agreed with everything that's happened, or everything that the teacher did. So I liked that when everything was going in a direction of assuming that just because the person is close, they knew or something to that extent, you gave the person that stepped in the benefit of the doubt. And it's like this person is just stepping in into this very complex situation and is willing to create something new. Like you said, like even though the same hotel, same dates and same tickets apply, is willing to create something new. And let's give this person a chance to show what can be done and how he can rearrange the whole event so it works. Because you mentioned too that there are costs involved. There are things that have already been paid, like the hotel and all these things. I don't know how that works because I never organized events. I never have been the person that got in contact with the hotel and did that part of the negotiation or the venue itself. But I think that you brought this consideration that there are some logistics in play who are, given how close the event is, that it's already cost that has been, it's like something that has been agreed upon already. And to support the person who is taking over. I think that for attendees, they might, and teachers as well, it might be like a subconscious thing that is very strong, that even though it's a different event, different person, different name, because it's the same date or because it's substituting the previous event, they might still create a connection that it is still the event. And it might be hard for people to separate both things. And I don't have a question here. I'm just wondering how that aspect of the human mind can play an important factor on whether or not the person who stepped in can actually do something, and not incur these ginormous costs from the previous event.
I mean, it's complicated because people have a right to feel emotions, right? There are some people for whom attending this event might be too painful. It might be uncomfortable. It may be tainted, right? Just because of the proximity. Maybe they're a survivor themselves. Maybe they know someone who's a survivor. Maybe the whole thing just makes them sick, right? So those people, I have a lot of empathy for that visceral emotional reaction of, this is how I feel and there's nothing that can be done that makes this okay, right? But we also have a parallel responsibility to recognize blame where it is owed. And you can be angry and you can choose not to attend an event. You can choose to request a refund without assigning blame to the person who's stepping into the thing. And recognizing that, especially with stuff like this, the people who are closest to this person, they're probably way, way worse off than any of the general population, because I can't imagine any person being that close to the individual and saying, oh yeah, I knew he was doing this. The level of twisted that would need to be there to have justified that behavior and not knowing that had happened. It's, as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to automatically assume they did not know, right? And so it's okay to be angry. It's okay to pull out of the event. It's okay to reserve that space emotionally and to have all of the big feelings, as long as the blame doesn't get misallocated to his wife, his partner, his co-organizer, who are now picking up all of the shattered pieces that have been shattered because of one person's actions, right? So there's no way they can refund everyone. The money's not there. And you can yell and scream and kick all you want, but all that's going to happen is the company's going to go bankrupt and you'll never see the cent if everyone tries to claim a refund. It's impossible, right? The cost is sunk. And it's not their fault. And it's not the attendee's fault. It's that person's fault, right? And so you can have all of those feelings. You can be mad that you can't get a refund. You can be mad that you've lost money, but it's not the problem of the people who are trying to do the best they can to manage. Is the problem of the person who made the decisions that hurt the community. And I think sometimes we're very bad at differentiating that because we want to do something now. We want justice. We want retribution. We want punishment. We want what's best for us, right? And like emotions are wonderful and can be very motivational, cathartic. They can help in a lot of ways, but they can also cause us to do things irrationally and in a way that's not sealing the situation, but is actually inflaming it and making damage worse. And I think that's where sometimes the community members struggle a little bit because they feel so deeply and we want the best. And unfortunately, it's just a situation where there is no good outcome. There's just the best that can be done in the circumstances. And learning to live with that and processing those complicated emotions, it's hard. It's not easy.
Absolutely. Talking about this situation in particular, I think it's tragic. It's terrible based on the knowledge that we have. But then when you look at previous cases or previous behaviors that happened in the community, I remember being part of groups of conversations where people were divided between like, well, let's wait and see, or let's just ban that person forever, because some people would sometimes even classify as, well, there's no police report. It's just people talking about it, or nobody has gone to jail, so then they don't deserve to be canceled or something. So I remember in some cases, people were making decisions based on that specific thing. Was there a police report? If no, then it's just people talking. Or did that person go to jail or go to trial or something? No, well, then that person can still be part of the community because they were not found guilty. How do we actually navigate that? I know how I navigate because in terms of like these situations, I'm always very careful, very, very careful. If there's anything that you can do, system that you can put in place to make sure that your community is safe, I will do that. If that means that if there's any question about somebody, maybe I shouldn't have them in my community, then I prefer not to have them in my community until proven that that person has not done anything wrong, or that maybe a long, long time later, they have changed, they have improved, they're a different person. But is there any way that you would recommend people that are in the community to draw the line, or is this something very individual?
So when you're making decisions about bad behavior, the majority of cases are not like this recent one. There's maybe 4 cases that I can think of, maybe like in Zouk specifically, if I broaden that to other dances that I've dealt with, maybe under 10 that I know of, where it's kind of this visceral, everyone's agreed, this is unacceptable, the person has to be gone now, right? That's a very small number considering the volume of people, the number of dances, the number of events, the number of staff, artists, pros, attendees, whatever, right? So we're talking about these major cases being a very tiny percentage. Everything else, people disagree. And people can disagree in a way that's reasoned and considered, or in a way that's reactionary, right? And reactionary responses to bad behavior tend not to be conducive. And like, for example, there's statements like, we must always believe victims. We must always do this. We must always remove the threat. If they have done anything, they should be gone because our scenes need to be completely safe. And I've seen people reserve that for like, oh, this person like forcibly someone to, oh, you know, they grazed someone's boob while they were dancing, right? And there's this visceral kind of that happens as soon as you hear that something is wrong. But it's never that sinful, first of all, because people who are victims are human. People who are perpetrators are human. And people react to things in dramatically different ways, and the circumstances are just as varied. And there has to be, if you're going to make a reasoned decision on this, you have to consider all of those angles. And I think this whole police report versus not police report thing is a bit of a scapegoat. And we can actually use the current case as an example. There's no actual criminal conviction yet. It's going to trial. He's been indicted and is being held. But technically, he hasn't been found guilty yet, right? But we've all decided that this is enough. This person shouldn't be here. Who's made that decision without a criminal conviction? It's just an indictment, right? And that, to me, is very reasonable, given the nature of what has happened, given the amount of credibility involved, given the seriousness of the action statement to date. It makes sense, right? So using that same test, some organizers could say this person should be allowed, but we're not saying it in this case because it's bad enough, right? So it's a scapegoat. What is a more responsible way to go around it is to either develop the skills or find someone who has the skills to help you actually look at the different aspects. That means talking to people who say that they were victimized. That means talking to the person who is alleged to have done the things. It's looking for patterns of behavior. It's looking at the available information. It's essentially an investigation, right? And like, I've done that a lot. And I've done that for little things and I've done it for big things. And it's a lot. It's a lot emotionally. It's a lot time-wise. But it's only when you have all of that information as an organizer that you can actually make a credible decision on what should be done in the individual instance. Is this something where a conversation will suffice? Is this something where if what is alleged is true, there's a great risk of harm to the people at my event, or is the harm going to be minimal? Is this something where I believe the person has insight into their actions or not? Does the person who is a victim want anything to be done or not? Is this a gray area where it's an isolated incident and because we don't have any other information, we need to wait and see if it happens again? Or is it compelling? And I can call back to a case that happened in around 2018. We had a guy who was very influential, no criminal charge or anything like that. And there was a massive effort to remove him from the scene because it turned out that there was, girls in 7 different countries who did not know each other, who all had an experience of essentially grooming and coercion and control and abuse, right? And the whole thing was, they're colluding, they're, coming together to manufacture a story. No one's pressing criminal charges. There's all of this little bits, right? But there's nothing firm. But when you look at the totality, the idea that there's 10 women in 7 countries who all have described a similar pattern of behavior that has been witnessed over a period of years, overwhelmingly, they're probably not making this up, right? And so there's a little chance that he clearly had no idea what he was doing, right? He's so detached, or there was this conspiracy or something. But overwhelmingly, the information points at, look, I don't think it's safe for you to be here. I think you're a risk to participants. I don't think you should be allowed to participate in this community because it's a risk, right? And that was controversial. There were organizers who said, oh, no, he's one of our best ticket resellers and, he supports everything and was really helpful at the event. He would never do this, right? I'm not going to do anything else as a criminal charge. But is that responsible at that point? Have you actually considered things? Because if you say, in light of all of this information, I still think he should be allowed to attend, you better have a reason for it. If you can't articulate the reason, then the only thing you can say is there's no police report. It's not enough of a reason to allow someone continued access to a space where they have authority, influence, and access to people. That makes sense. The inverse is also true. I know that there are people who have experiences that very much affect them, and I have empathy for that. Or this guy I thought we had something special and then, he cheated on me with somebody in the scene. He's an asshole. He needs to be banned. And you know what? Yeah, don't cheat. Just have an open relationship with you too, but be honest, right? That's a good person / an integrity issue. That's not a safety of the community issue, provided that everything that happened was generally consensual, right? And to me, it would be very, very wrong to ban someone for just kind of being a dick, if that makes sense, right? Or accidentally groping someone one time, or thinking that they saw the signals that someone wanted to kiss and one time they kind of messed up. So those are conversations maybe you have, but this is not the same level as the people who have a permaban from everything around the world because they did something so terrible, right? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, 100%. The police report thing, as you were mentioning, Laura, it resonates with me strongly because my mother she's retired now, but she used to work for the police. She was like a police deputy for 20-something years, and the strength that is required sometimes from victims of situations like sexual harassment or abuse or anything on that regard that involves relationship with someone that they once trusted and loved is really difficult. It's really hard for someone to really go to the police and press charges, And I was really close to a case that happened 2009, 10, don't remember the year right now, again, with multiple women. There was a website and everything. And my mom needed to go with one of them to the police department to be next to them so they could file the police report, So it's not easy. And like you said, the argument, if there's not a police report, then I cannot do anything, for me, reminded me of that difficulty for someone to actually do that. It's not easy. And I think too that when something like this happens and people have these strong reactions, I think is a lot related to the relationship of trust that once existed with that particular individual is broken. And sometimes the gravity of breaking that trust for each person is going to vary. And I think that's the part that is very hard to mend, because with certain people, we put them into this, this shiny pedestal of ethics and morals. And when they do something wrong, and like you said, sometimes it's something grave and sometimes it's like something with the body, or sometimes was a misunderstood signal, that trust is broken and the person falls from the pedestal and suddenly becomes this horrible human being. And I think that's the hardest part to mend, is to mend that perception of the person that once existed and now is not the same anymore. And this falls a lot into the organizers and community local teachers that needs to go through this extensive process of investigation to understand all their circumstances and talk with everybody. And this is something that, we have done here too so many times. And I think we have come to you many times as well, like as a cry for help, like what do we do? How do we do? And it's not easy at all. So it's maybe one of the most challenging aspects of this job is dealing with that when the trust is broken, or when the perception of someone as someone trustworthy is shattered for some reason. That's the hardest part for me.
Yeah. I remember the case that you're talking about as well. And I think part of the difficulty is, for some people, the trust shatters. And for some people, they can't reconcile that they do trust or like the person or admire the person, and therefore they have to discard the information that's come to light, right? Because those are the kind of the two reactions. And understanding that can be very empowering, because very often when you have people who are supporting an individual because it's not their experience with that person, right? You're essentially asking them to view the person as a villain that they never thought the person was. And that can be a very difficult thing if you really admire this person, for some people it happens instantly. It's like, oh, you did this thing, so you're horrible. How dare you? And for some people, they never get there, right? They're like, no, they can't have done that, right? It must be a misunderstanding. They didn't mean it. They must not have realized, they're struggling with things. And both of those perspectives are very valid, but both have to be worked through to come to the realization that the idol is a person, right? And it doesn't matter how bad things are that someone has done. There were people that loved them. There are still people that love them. They have probably done something good in their lives. They may have been very helpful. They may have been very kind in other circumstances. And the holistic view of the perpetrator as a person, you can often add a lot of nuance, but it's also a lot to carry, right? To see a complex figure where we want to exclude or include. And so that kind of trust piece of it figures into it extremely, extremely strongly in the viscerality that we have towards doing something or not doing something or wanting to ignore, because it's very painful to confront. And I've talked to a lot of people who have been accused of things, and even the person from 9 or 10 years ago, I've had like a 2-hour conversation with him. And a lot of having those conversations is holding space for empathy, but not permission, right? And that's a very difficult thing to do, because the vast majority of people who have done a bad thing, they don't do the bad thing because it's bad, right? The vast majority of people are not psychopaths or sociopaths where they truly are okay with doing something that they know is wrong and that they know is harmful because it benefits them. Everyone else does a whole lot of justifying to get to the point they did the bad thing, right? They will do mental gymnastics to put themselves in a position where they don't have to feel bad about the thing that they did. And that doesn't mean it's okay, but it does mean that they're human. And we cannot ask victims to do that. It's not the role of a victim to see the perpetrator as a three-dimensional human being. But especially if we're in a position of power or influence, we are not the victim. And my personal position is, while you can be supportive of victims, you also can't be the support person of the victim. That is a different role, because people who have been subject to things, they need to have someone who's 1,000% in their corner, the person that they rant to, the person who validates the entirety of the experience that they are feeling as they feel it. But that is a different role than the person who is looking to make a reasoned decision on next steps forward, right? That person needs to be able to hold the reality of both the perpetrator and the victim. They need to be able to work through that breaking of trust and deciding, is it repairable? Is it one time? Is it multiple times? Is it a risk? Is it not a risk? They have to be able to push through that emotional layering to get to a resolution. And this is very similar to, and I know like both you and I are lawyers by training, which means we've both been part of a regulatory body. And the role of a regulator in any sort of profession is that they are looking at the professional conduct and suitability of people who are practicing. And you can lose your license for things like malpractice, but you can also lose your license for things like criminal convictions or being charged with beating a spouse or something like that, right? So there's things that are severe enough that are not related to the profession. There's things that are professionally related, right? We don't have that in dance, but our professionals occupy a similar place of trust, but we don't have the mechanisms to deal with it, which means that it ends up falling to the organizers to figure out almost how to be a self-regulator for the people that they're working with. And for the general public, sometimes we kind of idolize instead of viewing a whole person. And then we react emotionally in a way that often makes the situation worse, not better. That's just how it goes.
Yeah, that's something that I was thinking about here. How do we deal with that in terms of a person of high power versus not, or somebody famous versus not? Whether it's the dance community or the music industry, movies, whatever level that is, sometimes we've heard terrible things about people in power But then people are like, well, it doesn't affect me. They're still great singer. They're still great actor. They're still great soccer player, whatever. Doesn't affect me. I'm going to support and still love that person. But then when it's the dance community, because the dance community is so big but so small at the same time, it does affect everybody. So then, yeah, like how do we navigate that comparison between like, well, this soccer player or this singer did same thing as that dancer, but people still support that guy, that famous, powerful millionaire, but everybody wants to cancel the dancer.
I mean, it's parasocial relationships, right? So a parasocial relationship is this idea that you feel like you know the person even though you don't actually know them. You know their persona, right? Like all three of us have people who are in a parasocial relationship with us where we don't know much about their lives, but they know a lot more about what we do, right? It doesn't mean they know us, but there's this like bond that goes one way unless that duality is established back to the other person, right? And when we're talking about kind of this support for the persona versus support for the person, it's such an individual value test, right? There's no right or wrong. There's what are your values? What do you view as important? What is the world you want to live in, right? And I can give you an unrelated example here. I have a dear friend who has probably one of the highest levels of integrity of anyone I know, where his default thing is, well, of course I'm going to claim every $20 that I make on my taxes because it's my civil duty to support the infrastructure of our society through taxes, and that's the world I want to live in. The vast majority of us don't declare $20 that we got at some random thing for a little thing, but he does because that's the world he wants to live in. And so he contributes in a way that reflects the place he wants to be, right? And when we look at this type of thing, you have people who really don't care about anything beyond them having a good time. They don't want to know the drama that's going on. They don't want to know what's going on. They would rather just live in a bliss bubble because this is what they do for fun. And we may not like that. It may not be the way we're geared, but that's who they are. And it would be wrong to try to force that person to live by a different set of morals than what their personal integrity demands, unless that is starting to harm other people. And so obviously there's like different things. You can put pressure on culture to go a certain way. You can normalize certain types of behaviors and shun other types of behaviors, reward the good behaviors, dissociate from the bad behaviors. And you do have people in the community who are like, I don't go to this organizer's events because I don't like that, they don't treat all of their artists well. Or I support this person's events no matter what, because I think that they act with integrity and I know that they treat people well and are trying to build something good, right? So you see the community aligning themselves with people of a similar value set, and wherever the balance of that power rests is the general tract of the community, right? And so that individual judgment piece figures into this. It's okay on a personal level to say, I really love this person's music. I'm going to play their stuff, even though they did this really bad thing and they're no longer part of the community. This old music to me, great. I love it. I want to listen to it. I want to dance to it. I just won't buy their new records. I won't fit them on, right? You have other people who are like, I don't want any imprint of this person on the community whatsoever, so I am never going to play their music and I am not going to listen to their music. I'm going to avoid dancing to their music if it's played. Also, fine. But under both of those is a consideration, right? And to me, the more important thing is that people reflect on why they're making a decision rather than coming to a specific decision, right? And that's something that I also talk with organizers about when they ask me about, this person that did a bad thing, should I hire them? Do you think they're better now? Right? And most of that conversation is not about, is the person actually better? It's what are your values as an organizer? Are you comfortable with this person representing your values? Are you comfortable controlling the situation? What level of risk do you think they pose? It's not about are they better or are they not better. You can't know that. You're not in their brain. You can only look at the available information to make that decision. And it's the same thing for the general community. There's no right or wrong.
Yeah. Man, this reminds me so much of Michael Jackson for some reason. Because I think it's one of those situations, as someone who made great contributions for art and pop culture. And because of the things that happened, some people don't want to hear his music. And some people but he made such beautiful art. How come can we not listen to his music? So it reminded me of.
So is it like if somebody is a genius, they're excused? It kind of sounds like that sometimes. If they're genius or if they're like one of a kind human, then people tend to go like, well, yes, it's terrible, but they're a genius. And they kind of just separate that. But then to the person next to them, they'll go like, no, that person, death penalty, because they're not a genius. They're not a famous person. They're not superhuman or something.
I mean, to be honest, sometimes that does happen. That's human nature. We don't like to work against our own self-interest. And that includes when we enjoy something. If we like it, we want to keep enjoying it. It's really, really hard to get people to give up something that they like. It's really easy for them to jump on the bandwagon if they don't actually have any skin in it, right? And you see that with the geniuses, the one of the kinds, those influential people. Because for the recent one's a good example. It had to be really freaking bad to come to that solution, because there are other people who have done things and we still listen to their music. We still, they still tour in some parts of the world, right? And that's an individual call. I know what call I would make as a person. I know what stance I would support with other organizers, but I can't control every single member of the community. And if I start putting judgment on anyone who disagrees with how I would handle it, we're going to go down a very, very weird loophole really, really, really fast.
And very divisive as well, right?
Yeah.
It's going to create these different polarities all over. It's going to be pretty bad. As you were saying, Laura, I remember in law school, one of the first things I learned in law school was that whatever we do in law is never to find truth. We'll never find truth. We'll never understand what really happened. We will go around and try to get to something that is as close as possible to it by trying to understand everything that happened and talking to everybody and seeing all the circumstances. And like you said, there is people who need to be completely supporting both sides of whatever happened. And there is someone in the middle who understands everything and is trying to look at the broader picture. In Portuguese, there is a word for it. There is true, which is verdade, and there is verossimilhança, which is something similar to the truth. That's what we are trying to get to. Yeah, so I really resonating with me when you mention the part of someone who is supporting the victim, for example, through and through. And another component is having someone who is also looking to make a good informed decision, right? Because the other thing that in law school is interesting to learn in the criminal area, in the criminal system, is that this grading of how serious, of how grave something is, to decide the penalty. So if these things happen, the penalty is this much. So you give the person a chance to do a community work, and then they can go back to society, or they can remain in society as they do the community work, given the gravity of the situation. But some things are so grave that they need to be removed from society and stay years removed and then come back. So there is this scale that the criminal system follows. And because our community, and many other dance community, art communities, there is, of course, there's nothing like that. Even the smallest things, like you said, for example, my boyfriend cheated on me, he should be banned. Like the gravity of the situation is one, and the required consequence for that is another one, because we are dealing with someone who had the thing happen to them personally. So they want a strong reaction for whoever is making the decisions in the community. So as someone who studied these things and trains these things, I think my mind immediately go to these aspects, that the things that I learned in law school, and then I think this way. And then when people talk to me, sometimes they want me to have a stronger statement or make a stronger decision or support here, support that, and like fast come to a judgment and a decision on something. In this case that we started the episode with, like we said, it was pretty unanimous, the decision, given how bad it is. In all the other cases that, like you said, is a minority of things. So it's like we can count in our hands how many. In the other cases, it's not that simple for me to go and then just to make a decision like that, because I have had a very close friend. He was a dancer, but it's something that happened completely outside of the dance, where his case ended up in television. He needed to leave Brazil. He fled to Portugal. And then after years in courts, it was discovered that he didn't do the thing he was accused to do. And prosecution recommended that he goes and file an action against those who filed an action against him. But his life was so completely destroyed already that he didn't want anything to do with Brazil anymore or people from there. So he never came back. And I know 2 other cases like that too. So for me, it's really difficult at times to come to a conclusion like that and say, this person is the devil, So I default to, okay, let's look at the complexity of everything. And then based on what we discover, we make a decision. And like you said, it takes a lot of time and a lot of emotional investment. It's pretty hard to do. And that's something that I don't think people, the dancers at large, are fully aware or can fully grasp how much goes into making a decision to ban someone or to make someone stay away from the community for this many months. There's a lot that goes into it that I don't think it's easy to understand if you are not in it, if you're not completely in it. It's very complicated. It's part of the job that was not in the description when I first started. Yeah, I didn't. It was not there anywhere. And it was very surprising to see and to experience these things. I remember this thing from 2018 that you mentioned. It was a big one. And I remember being just like, oh my God, I just looking to the sides and, like seeing everything unfold before my eyes, because Ashley here was also involved. So I don't know, just slightly ranting here a little bit. There's something too that it's difficult. It is very difficult.
And I have a question about this whole situation, because will this now kind of reset the bar for how the community reacts? Because this case is such like unanimous. Nobody can argue with this case. Will that then in the future make people think twice before, like a situation like you mentioned, somebody by accident touch somebody's hips or somebody's breasts or something like that, and then they get banned? Will that kind of shake things up and make people think differently in the community? Or, should they or will they?
My guess is no, and I will tell you why. It is extremely difficult to fully remove people who have done really, really bad things, right? The amount of work that goes into that is gigantic. The amount of people who are truly banned from a community over small infractions, very small. And the reason for that is that typically if you're having people who are doing that kind of, I would hazard to say, overreaction, right? You're usually dealing with very new or very emotionally charged local politics, right? Because I can't think of any organizer of a major event where, this person cheated on me, so they should be banned. I don't think I can think of a single big organizer who would look at that and go like, oh yes, they are definitely banned from my event, right? It doesn't reach the threshold for those who have been around to take that kind of decisive action, right? That's more of a local level thing. And my biggest gripe actually with some of the larger events is sometimes we don't do enough action on certain things, or using behavioral agreements or like other tools to manage when something is small. And where I do think the current case may direct things is I actually think in this case we kind of got it right. I was a little worried at the beginning because some of the very early gut reactions were extremely charged and kind of throwing everything out of the window, but that shifted. I think there were enough people with a more moderate discourse that we found the right way to handle it in this situation.
I think it's a lot thanks to you, to be honest, for your guidance in the community. Very much so.
True. I think so too, because I was monitoring the chats and the things, and after you said something,
Yes.
there was like in the timeline of my experience, of my observations, it changed. I saw people changing their own speech after you said the thing. So there was like, they had a torch in their heads, and then you said something, and they're like, oh, okay, let me put the torch there. It was like night and day shift. So I think you kind of like spearheaded this one.
We pretty much just found about the whole thing almost around this hour after recording last Sunday. And for the first few hours, I was just like lost on the internet. I was just like, what's going on? Until you started like posting your things. And then I think the entire community went like, okay, that's how you talk about something. Yeah. That's how you go about something. Let's all recenter, refocus. Because I think everybody was just lost. So thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for saying that. I don't want to take full credit for this. I appreciate the recognition. But what I was going to say with that is the moderateness in this case, and whether it was like following my lead or other people just felt emboldened or had a similar thought process, I think we kind of got it really right. And like, kudos to the new organizer as well for stepping up and seeking the support he needed and taking such steps. But I do think it can serve as a template for what to do in the wake of ruling and how to talk about things. I don't necessarily think it will change the overall flow with the more gray issues, because I think the problem with gray issues continues to be there's no agreement. And when there's a lack of agreement, that's where things get really complicated because people start trenching into their own attitudes, right? This one, in some ways, even though it's so much worse than anything else, is so much simpler.
That's true.
There's no one who disagrees. But we see it on the internet. Like, you could take any polarizing topic, take vaccines, take political stuff, take religious things, take Tantra Zouk. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But people have strong opinions, and people are really, really bad at saying, oh, maybe I came on too strong with that. Maybe I should consider another viewpoint. And maybe I should try to understand before I respond. We're really bad at it. People are really bad at that, just overall. And that's what makes the middle ground so challenging for so many people, is that we don't want to think, we want to react, right? And even in leadership capacities, the amount of times that I've gotten like a panicked call being like, we need to do something, we need to say something, we need to act now, we need to make our position clear. And I'm like, but what is your position? Have you actually thought about what the rational position is here? Have you thought about how this is going to come across? Have you thought about the impact of what you say? Because the stakes are really low if you're some random person in the community, but the more power and influence you have, the more responsibility you need to take on to make sure you're considering those things, because you will change how other people react and it will start modeling on your behavior and echoing your sentiments, right? So emotional post by random dancer that's been dancing 6 months in a really tiny town. Like, you can afford to have an unreasoned emotional visceral reaction publicly because the scope of what will be impacted is small, right? But if you are the Prada and you post an unthoughtful rant on the internet, you've changed the discourse of the entire community. Because anyone who follows you, like, I'm aware of this in my capacity, but if you follow somebody, there's a lot of people that because they do that same idolization, whatever you take is now the truth. It doesn't matter if you thought it through. It's now true for a lot of people, right? And that's kind of where we run into these really charged and opposing things. And that's where I see the risk on these gray areas. And that's kind of why I think we still need to be very aware of, as we move forward, getting better at addressing the middle, not the extremes. That was a very random way to get to the point, but
No, but I think that was a great way to summarize pretty much like the whole conversation, like as a community, it's very clear when it's at the top or at the bottom, but those middle areas is where things just get out of hand. Either get out of hand, get out of proportion, or maybe are not recognized enough. Yeah. All of that middle ground.
It's very interesting because I was listening to a podcast interview with someone who coaches people in position of leadership in terms of what they say and how they say things. And he was saying that there is this trend that people in a position of power avoid saying sorry, avoid apologizing, because it can be seen as like either a sign of weakness, or it can be seen as a confirmation that you did what you were accused of doing. And that is the thing that destroys your career. That's the thing that destroys you in your position, whatever that is. So there is this indication of you don't apologize, you don't acknowledge what you did. And this is something that contributes to the polarization in political world, religious world, and all these things, because even though someone, in their intimate circles understands that what they did was something that was not something good for the community that they belong, they will not say, they will not acknowledge that they did something, because that acknowledgement will maybe disrupt their base, like disrupt the people that support them, no matter what they do. And it can potentially damage in their careers. I found that really fascinating. Although we don't have the same level in the dance community, I can see that happening in the way that people express their opinions with so strongly. But even afterwards, the person recognized that their opinion was strong. There is a hesitancy in saying, "Oh, I acknowledge that my position was strong." They just change narrative without the acknowledgement. And like you said, if someone in a small community that just started, it just goes unnoticed. But if someone in a position of influence that is very much noticed, and sometimes something that people ask for, something that people require you to do, either position yourself or acknowledge that what you did was wrong. And there is all this, like we're saying, all this gray area, everything in between. And every time we have something of that magnitude that just happened this past week happening in the community, just all these discussions kind of like resurface, and over time goes away again until something else happens, But there is one thing I think might change is, and I was talking to a friend about it, is that many times organizers welcome us in their homes. They not only welcome us in their homes, but they give us the key of the house, the password of the safe. They like the level of trust that is given to us is so big. Sometimes people give their own bedrooms for us to sleep, and they sleep on the couch, you know? So what this friend of mine was pondering is if the trust that the organizers feel will change in the sense of welcoming us into their homes when we travel, or if there will be more oversight, or if there will be less information shared. Very speculative, but it was a good point that I didn't think about before, because in this particular case, although it was not something that happened in the dance scene, it's something that happened in the house of someone who trusted that person and welcomed them because saw this person as someone nice for their family and to be around. So I think based on this conversation, you resonated with me that that could be something, that could be a consequence. That's something that could change in the way that we go about things in the dance community. To be seen.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, it was very, very interesting point of view. I was like, oh boy, that's very true. Then I was remember all the times that I was left alone in their homes with their animals, with all of their things, you know, and just things happening. But it just takes one case to change the entire landscape of things. So I don't know.
You know, this conversation about like apologizing and taking ownership, I find it very interesting that many of us are so bad at it when it's all we want from other people.
Yes.
Because like talking about kind of like, I know we had chatted a bit about like restorative justice as a principle versus punitive justice, right? Like, do we punish or do we rehabilitate? And one of the biggest things that kind of goes into like that, I am not a fan of punitive justice. I'm a fan of restorative justice, big time, because I think people are complex and stupid and intelligent at the same time. And I think people are capable of growth as a default. They have to choose to grow, but they're capable of it. And when we think about people who have done something wrong, one of the biggest things is, can they take ownership and recognize the harm that they have caused and be willing to take the steps to make it better? And I think one of the biggest things that I see people who have done something wrong struggle with is they want there to be an end goal to rehabilitation. Tell me what to do so that I can go back to how it was before, right? And as soon as it's approached that way, it actually tells me that they're not ready, because the only way that someone can show that they're ready is if the conversation is not about when will I be ready, it's when will the community be ready for me? Can they be ready for me, right? And that might mean waiting until the victim is no longer part of the community, or making sure that you're not putting yourself into situations where people might be uncomfortable. It might mean never rejoining the community if it's caused a lot of damage. It might mean extensive therapy and self-work and apologies and being proactive on managing behaviors that may have led to that. Like, for example, if someone has mental health issues, we've had sometimes that come into play, or substance abuse issues, things that may have impaired their reactions. It doesn't mean that the community will automatically be ready for them to return. But one of the biggest issues that I see is people who take a time out and want to come back. But then you talk to them and the insight isn't there. The reflection isn't there. It's, I know I did a bad thing, but I'm better now. And you're like, but we're having this conversation, so you're not.
I know.
If you were, this would not be the conversation that we're having, because I wouldn't have to tell you why it's inappropriate for you to be here. You would have done that reflection. You would have asked before participating in the All-Star and Champion Jack and Jill, just an example, not a real life thing, but you would have asked before joining this if everybody was okay with that and comfortable with that, if the organizer was comfortable with that opt-in. But you didn't.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So there are people who have rejoined after doing something because they actually did the work, and what they did was something where they could reintegrate, right? I know people who have recovered from things and who have rejoined in a constructive way. But it's hard, and more often than not, the greatest barrier to that is just wanting to come from serving a place of self. And I had a case where there was someone they banned from the local community over things that happened a decade ago when they had been in the community before. And the reason why I made the decision that they weren't allowed to return, what they did had been really bad, but technically none of the people involved were still around. But in the conversation I had with them, they didn't tell me everything that happened. I had to find it out from other people. They didn't reflect on it. They had a rationale for everything that happens, right? And then when I said no, they got very angry immediately. It was like a switch flipped and I saw a completely different person sitting in front of me when I had told them no. And that actually made the decision much easier.
Yeah, that's been my issue with some of the people that have returned, to my knowledge, is the fact that from the conversations that I've been present, they either still don't agree that they've done anything wrong, or they just live in a complete denial of their fault. And they're just like, but I never did anything wrong. Like, okay, then we haven't moved a bit.
Just to add on to that, you know what's really interesting? There's a few times where things were fabricated, right? And I know of one where there was like a particular individual who went to different communities and essentially told the same story about whatever male pro was in whatever community it touched. And it was almost verbatim and, you know, got people's fire and stuff like that from what they were saying. And then they hit someone in Zouk. And the conversations are so different with the people who actually don't think they've done something wrong, because there's this lack of defensiveness, because they're just like, I really thought everything was okay and I feel horrible. Like, I'm trying to think of what possibly could have given them this feeling or this impression. Like, I'm racking my brain to pull up the dregs of, you know, did I do something? Did I say something? Was there something that I did? And it haunts them in like this deep way that, oh my God, I might have hurt someone. And it's such a different conversation and such a different just everything, even if nothing actually happened.
Yeah, it happened to me once in Australia. I was part of an event as an attendee. Basically, it was one of those times that I go to a Zouk Congress just because I want to have fun and dance all weekend. And at the end of one of the nights, somebody came to me at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, a teacher friend of mine, and told me, hey, I need to talk to you. Then they explained the situation that somebody felt uncomfortable with one of the dances that I've had on that night. And immediately I was like in shock. And they kind of could tell me, they're like, you were not aware, were you? And I'm like, absolutely not. Where is this person? Do they want to talk about it? Do they want to, like, what should I do next? Because we just, it was very, very much a situation where I was glad, very, very happy that somebody came to me and told me right away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something similar actually happened to me. It wasn't related to like a dance discomfort. It was actually someone who felt I had discriminated against them based on race. And I only found out through a podcast several years later that they had this oppression, because I recognized a story that they were sharing. And I was like, I think that's me. I think that person that they're talking about is me.
Damn.
And there was like a whole, like, I just went down this rabbit hole of internalized racism and was it motivated and da-da-da-da. And I can remember the conversation going off the rails and feeling it was going off the rails and trying to make it better. And everything that I was trying to do to like make it better and cushion it actually had the inverse effect. And it was a very big like aha moment in just like, okay, how do I not repeat this? Right? How do I make sure that this is not the experience people have with me? Because this is the antithesis of what I stand for. This is the antithesis of what I want community to be. Right? And it doesn't really matter that it wasn't my intention. And it could be. There could have been racism involved. Because the nature of these things is that there's all kinds of unconscious biases and there's all kinds of like latent conditioning that we have. And the best thing that we can do is just reflect and try to do better. And that includes both when we've been told that we've done something that makes someone uncomfortable or feel unsafe. And it also applies when we're reacting to highly emotional and sensitive situations where we might need to adjust what we do or what we think to make things better instead of worse, and see how can we respond in a better way that creates a community that we want to be in.
Yeah. It reminds me that I've always also been, at least in a conversation when someone, like something similar to happen to you too, has happened to me as well. That I was in a conversation with someone else, and in a conversation with someone who was like, nah, but it was not so bad. Come on. It was just like, we were just kidding. We were just playing. Do you think I really meant that? You know, like it is, oh my God, it's completely, totally different. Totally different vibe for sure. Something maybe to be mindful of when dealing with situations like that.
I mean, we're all human. We're all going to make a mistake at some point. There's going to be someone somewhere who has a negative experience with us, whether we meant it or not, whether we were having an off day or not, whether we made a mistake or it was just a lack of awareness, right? But ultimately, it comes down to ownership and responsibility.
Yeah. And like you said, Nat, you found out about it years later in a podcast.
Yeah.
And I have had a situation that happened to me not related to dance that I found out 6 years later. It was like during the pandemic, and I get this audio from a friend. He was a dance friend from Jaime, like back in the day, in the 2007, 8, 9. And I get an audio from him about something that happened in a barbecue party that we participated, that when he came to greet me, apparently I greeted him with more dry or something like that. And then he created a whole story in his head that he thought that I was upset because he was dating the same person that I dated a couple of years ago. And he thought that my behavior had to do with me disapproving of the relationship. And that created like this thing for 6 years until he finally, like, man, can I tell you something? I have been, and he was feeling guilty and everything, you know, and it was for me a wake up call of like how many interactions I might have had with people that they left thinking that I disapproved of something, or thinking that I did something that I will never know. Or one day I will know, like on a podcast or on like a 8-minute long audio message that comes out of nowhere on WhatsApp, you know. And this is mind boggling to me, just to confirm that the exact same episodes can be interpreted in a wide variety of ways, and that this wide variety of ways are all true to the person who is interpreting. And they leave with this impression, or they leave with this thinking that we did this thing that we might never know, you know. And it's a little bit, I don't know, it's when I think about that, I just want to stay in my room and never leave. but I think it's just like something that, you know, I know about it, but it still breaks my brain from time to time.
I love hearing like stories of reflection like that, because I think it humanizes a lot of things. It's much easier to accept the flaws in ourselves when we can see other people as flawed, but still be able to hold empathy and love for them. And I think that that's something that we can just collectively improve, especially when we're trying to deal with kind of these charged situations, is to stop making it right or wrong and just reflect on the humanity of it and finding the best path forward in the circumstances. And sometimes the flaws are minor and don't need much of a follow-up, and sometimes mistakes are made that require something more, right? Or actions hurt somebody and need to be addressed in a more significant way. But ultimately, if we're expecting perfection, every single person is going to fail at some point. And we can't expect it of ourselves, and we can't expect it of others. We can just try to do better constantly.
Yeah. I just want to say that I heard this thing super beautiful another day that Esther Perel says, confidence means that understand yourself as a flawed creature, but you still hold yourself in high regard. And I really, really like that, because she was saying that normally confidence is confused as cockiness, and like understanding that nothing that you do is wrong, that everything you do is good and correct. But she said it's a misconception, that is actually understand that you will make mistakes, but you still hold yourself in high regard and acknowledging that you are a flawed human, you know? So I really like that and have been reflecting on that ever since. And now that you just said that, Laura, you brought back this quote that I just heard. So I just wanted to mention that because I found it very beautiful.
For me, as you were speaking, if you roll back the video, you'll see that I just went away on a trip for a second because like it made so much sense to me with so many moments in my life where I felt like I was wrong or misjudging the entire situation. Making a long story short, I've made so many mistakes in my life. Personal life, professional life, all of the lives, all of the areas. And I've learned so much from it. And I love that I've been able to learn so much from it. But when somebody else makes a mistake, somebody else is on the fire and everybody's talking and throwing stones and everything like that, I always feel like thinking about the person, thinking about like, what about them? You know, like, were they okay? How did somebody get to that point? Because I feel like connected in a way that I've been in so many dark places in my life and I've made terrible decisions when I was in those dark places, that the first thought in my head is like, how bad was this person to get to a point of doing something like this, you know? So, and most of the times I just feel like I'm the odd one because everybody else has a very strong opinion about it. And I'm like on the opposite side, kind of like, yeah. So it made a lot of sense to me. It was very nice, very validating.
I mean, there's absolutely, and like this is just more for like the general public, there's absolutely nothing wrong with having a strong opinion, but you're responsible for what you do with that strong opinion. And like, as I said earlier, it's not the victim's job to have a rational, logical response to trauma that has happened. It is not the job of someone who has been hurt by a person to find an empathetic orientation to process what has happened. It is not their responsibility. But if you're anyone else and you want to create a healthier community, you have to look at how do we put antiseptic on the wound, not salt, right? How do we calm it down, not sweep it under the rug, not pretend it didn't happen, not justify it, not erase harm that has been done, because all of these things are really little things and don't have to be a bad person to cause harm. He can also be a bad person and cause harm relatively. But you need to look at what response is going to help instead of hurt. Is what I'm saying me posturing for social media likes? Or am I contributing to something that's going to make this better? Because if you're just yelling to yell because you know people will comment and you get that little like adrenaline boost when you see 200 people have liked my post, yeah, I did good, then you're probably not coming at this from the best direction, because that should not be the payoff. That should not be what you're seeking. You should not be seeking validation for holding your strong opinion. You should be looking at what is constructive to the community, what is going to help, what is going to heal, what is going to validate the experiences of those most affected by this in a way that is empathetic and that is reasonable and doesn't center you, who literally have nothing to do with this, in the center of a conversation that really should be centering the people immediately affected.
All I can say is, wow, we are so lucky to have you in our community. Not only because you're a beautiful person inside and out, but also because you're a very knowledgeable person who just has the biggest heart to help everybody who just knocks on your inbox or talks to you in person in any place that I've ever seen. So thank you. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing all of this with us.
Thank you for inviting me to be a part of it. I missed being a part of it. So I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, I was going to say that we will invite you more back, Laura, to do more episodes, to talk about more things, because I think more people need to hear you as much as they read what you write. I think it's going to contribute a lot for the conversations we have here.
Yes, please write more. I don't know if we have that much time nowadays, but I've always loved reading your blog. They're beautiful.
I do have a couple, they're a little bit older now, but I do have a couple articles on how to navigate bad behavior within a community. So within always a link to that or something like that so that people can
Yes, we can post a link to that
access
in the
those
description
resources.
of this. So once again, thank you, Laura. Thank you, Guy, for being here. This is an episode that for me, there were so many light bulb moments and moments that I think that will help a lot of people who are listening in the community for years to come. So thank you guys for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Alisson. Thank you so much, Laura. There's so valuable insights. And I will be hearing this episode again. Just to refresh the memory of several of the things you mentioned. Thank you.
Alrighty then. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. And we hope that you enjoyed it. Please follow us on our YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, TikTok, all of the things if you want to keep up with our full episodes or our little short episodes that we post in our social media. And we'll see you on the next one. Thank you. Beijos, abraços, and ciao.